Rain had been falling since dawn, a soft mist that clung to the asphalt and coated the military academy grounds in a silver sheen. The morning formation had ended only minutes earlier, and cadets streamed from the courtyard toward the main hall. Boots clattered against the floor, chatter bounced off steel lockers, and the unmistakable scent of damp uniforms filled the air. But at the center of the hallway, a pocket of stillness formed, where three senior cadets stood as if they owned every inch of the building. They called themselves the Triad. Not officially, not on paper, nothing the academy could punish, but everyone knew the name. Everyone else stayed out of their way. Until today. At precisely 7:20 hours, the entrance door swung open, almost silently, and a young woman stepped inside. She was small in stature, shoulders pulled back, walking with a calmness that didn't fit the frantic morning rush around her. A charcoal-gray duffel hung from her hand, light enough that she carried it without the slightest strain. The new girl. Nobody knew her name yet. Her file hadn't circulated. Her arrival hadn't been announced, but cadets whispered anyway, rumors spreading like static. Some transfer came from a civilian school, maybe failed a different academy, maybe someone's daughter with strings pulled. Speculation was easy. Reality was harder to read. Because the new girl moved like someone who'd been walking through hallways her entire life, calculating, observing, absorbing everything while giving nothing away. Cadet Lucas Hardin, the unofficial leader of the Triad, caught sight of her from halfway down the hall. He paused mid-sentence, narrowed his eyes, and nodded subtly. His two friends angled themselves outward, blocking the narrow pass between the lockers. The new girl saw the blockade. She didn't slow. Her boots clicked lightly, steadily, her pace unchanged. Cadets parted around her instinctively, like they sensed something they couldn't describe, like she carried a magnetic pull or an invisible threat. But the Triad didn't move. Hardin stepped into her path at the exact moment she reached them. "Well, well," he drawled, hands tucked casually into his uniform pockets. "Look what wandered in." His tone wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. The hallway quieted on its own, drawn like moths to the spark of potential conflict. Heads turned. Conversations trailed off. Even footsteps slowed to watch. The new girl lifted her eyes, not timidly, not defensively, but with the cool, detached focus of someone who had already assessed all three of them before even entering the hall. Hardin smirked. New transfers walk around like they're invisible. News flash, sweetheart, you're not. His friend, Burke, leaned against the locker and let out a low laugh. Maybe she doesn't know the rules. The third, Jensen, circled slightly behind her, not touching but invading the space around her. A predatory tactic meant to unsettle. Still, the new girl remained perfectly still. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her shoulders didn't tense. Only her fingers shifted slightly on the handle of her duffel, as if deciding whether they should keep holding it or let go. Hardin stepped closer. "Cadets like you, quiet, nervous, thinking they're tough, you usually break within the first week." His smile sharpened. "Want to make it easier and get out now, saves us all some time." Then, with deliberate disrespect, he shoved her shoulder. It wasn't a hard shove, not enough to hurt, just enough to show dominance, an ego-driven push meant to trigger fear or anger or embarrassment. But she didn't move. Not an inch. Her boots stayed planted. Her eyes stayed steady. Her expression didn't flicker, not annoyance, not surprise, not fear. She just existed there, unmoved, like steel disguised as skin. And that made Hardin hesitate. Just for a moment. A fraction of a second. But she saw it, and every cadet watching saw it too. Something subtle shifted in the air, something unspoken, something cold. The new girl finally spoke. "Don't do that again." Her voice was calm, not raised, not trembling, not defensive, calm enough that it felt eerie, as if she wasn't warning him for her sake, but for his. Burke straightened. "Excuse me." The girl slowly turned her head toward him. "You heard me." Jensen scoffed. "Is this chick for real?" Hardin forced a laugh, masking the prickling unease crawling under his skin. "Oh, she's real, all right, real stupid." He flicked his fingers toward the duffel. "What's in there? Stuffed animals, hair products, maybe a resignation letter you want help signing." This time Burke made a move, reaching out quickly, trying to snatch the bag from her hand. He never touched it. Her grip tightened imperceptibly and the duffel didn't budge. Burke tugged again, expecting resistance, expecting a struggle. Instead, her arm remained perfectly still, like he was pulling against a steel anchor. "What the?" Burke muttered, confused. Her eyes met his, flat, unamused, unbothered. "That's enough," she said softly. "Walk away." Hardin barked a laugh. "Or what? You gonna cry? Run to the instructors, you gonna." The girl tilted her head, studying him with a slight frown. Not fear, not intimidation. Disappointment. The kind of disappointment a professional might show an amateur. "You really don't want to do this," she said quietly. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Hardin's jaw clenched. Embarrassment burned in his chest. The hallway seemed to close in, every pair of eyes watching him, judging him. And the idea, the very idea, that this small, silent transfer cadet dared speak to him like he didn't matter. He stepped forward, raising his hand. "And then?" "Hardin," a voice barked from behind the crowd. The cadets parted instantly as Lieutenant Avery strode forward, his uniform immaculate, his expression sharp. He wasn't the kind of officer who walked hallways during cadet-free hours. He barely acknowledged most of them. But now he looked panicked, breath slightly uneven, eyes wide, as if he'd just witnessed something he hoped he hadn't. His gaze snapped to the girl. His face drained of color. "You," he whispered. And then louder. Everyone stepped back, immediately. Confusion swept through the hallway. Hardin frowned, unsure if the command was directed at him or her. The lieutenant didn't clarify. He simply repeated, more urgent. "Back away from her, all of you." The triad stiffened, suddenly unsure. Cadets shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged confused glances, others gulped. But the new girl didn't move. She didn't flinch. Didn't speak. Didn't seem surprised at all. She simply picked up the duffel, lifted it smoothly over her shoulder, and met Lieutenant Avery's gaze like she'd been expecting him. Hardin's confusion turned slowly to unease. "What's going on?" he demanded. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. If you had any idea who she was, you wouldn't have laid a finger on her. A long, heavy silence blanketed the hall. Cadets leaned in. Hearts pounded. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. The new girl sighed softly, her voice cool and tired as she addressed the lieutenant. "I asked for low profile," she said. "This isn't low profile." Avery swallowed hard. "It can't be low profile anymore." Hardin stepped back involuntarily. Because every part of the lieutenant's posture said the same thing. This girl, this quiet, unknown transfer, was someone he feared. Someone the academy feared. Someone dangerous. And suddenly, every cadet realized something all at once. The triad had just picked the worst possible target. And they had no idea how bad the consequences would be. The hallway was quiet now, but the tension crackled like live wires. Cadets froze mid-step, unsure whether to step forward, back, or bolt. Even the faint drizzle from the morning mist seemed to hush outside the windows, as if the world itself had paused. Lucas Hardin, the tallest of the triad, flexed his jaw, trying to regain dominance. "All right," he muttered, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow in the sudden silence. "You think you're special. You think you can just stroll in here and—" But he didn't finish. The new girl's gaze had locked onto him, calm, controlled, almost predatory. It was the kind of stare that dissected weaknesses without touching the skin, the kind that made a confident man reconsider every choice he'd ever made in a heartbeat. Hardin felt it. Even Burke and Jensen could feel it. The hallway, which had been a playground for arrogance and immature bravado, had become a cage. The new girl didn't move. She didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Only her eyes flicked briefly toward the lieutenant, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet authority backing her. Burke, still reeling from the earlier tug-of-war with the duffel bag, finally snapped. "Who do you think you are?" he spat, forcing bravado. "You can't just—" "Try me," she interrupted, voice low, unwavering. "I won't stop you, but I will make sure you regret it." Her words were soft, yet they carried weight like a hammer against steel. For a moment, the three cadets hesitated, unsure if she was bluffing or issuing a promise. Jensen, the cockiest of the three, stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "What are you gonna do, huh? Throw a textbook at us?" His sneer was meant to intimidate. The new girl tilted her head slightly, studying him. Then, with a subtle shift in weight and a small, almost imperceptible motion of her shoulders, she demonstrated why these cadets had no idea what they were dealing with. Before they could react, she moved, not fast in a cartoonish sense, but precise, measured, terrifyingly efficient. In one fluid motion, she grabbed Jensen's wrist as he swung toward her, twisted it, and directed his momentum into a controlled fall against the lockers. He hit the metal with a hollow clang and tumbled to the floor, groaning. The hallway erupted, not with cheers but with stunned silence. Burke and Hardin froze, staring, mouths open. The power dynamics they'd assumed were unshakable had been obliterated in under 3 seconds. The new girl didn't even breathe heavily. She adjusted the strap of her duffel, expression neutral, eyes on Burke next. Burke lunged, anger overtaking reason. But she sidestepped him, guiding his momentum harmlessly into the wall beside him, then pivoted to ensure he couldn't recover quickly. He stumbled, swore under his breath, and sank to the floor beside Jensen. Hardin's face had gone pale. He wasn't used to being powerless, and now, for the first time, he felt exposed. The new girl finally spoke, calm and precise. "You need to decide whether to step back or test me further." Her voice didn't quiver, it didn't shout, but it carried the weight of experience, of countless situations where hesitation meant failure or death. The lieutenant stepped closer, his presence a warning and a shield at the same time. "Cadets," he said, voice firm, "back away. Do you have any idea who she is?" Hardin's pride bristled. "She's just some transfer," he shot back, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The new girl's eyes flicked toward him, an almost imperceptible narrowing that spoke volumes. "You really don't know," she said softly, almost amused, though there was nothing playful about it. Burke muttered something under his breath, shaking with embarrassment. Jensen groaned, head in his hands. Hardin clenched his fists, trying to maintain the illusion of control. Lieutenant Avery's voice broke through their confusion. She's a Tier 1 Navy SEAL operator, the top of her class, the best you'll never forget." Gasps rippled through the cadets, disbelief plastered on every face. A SEAL here, among them, impossible. The new girl didn't flinch. Instead, she sighed. "I asked for a low-profile assignment. This isn't low-profile." Hardin's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "No," she said quietly. "You're just too stupid to believe it." The hallway went silent. Every cadet suddenly understood they had misjudged her, and the weight of that realization hit them like a blow. Humiliation gnawed at their pride, and fear replaced bravado. Burke's lip quivered. "She's just our age." "She's not just your age," Lieutenant Avery said, tone tight. "She's done more than any of you will in a lifetime." Hardin staggered back mentally, recalling rumors he'd overheard in passing. Stories of missions overseas, impossible rescues, operations whispered about in fear and awe. But that couldn't be real, could it? Before they could digest the reality, the lights flickered. A low hum of alarms echoed from deep within the building. Red warning lights pulsed, bathing the hallway in harsh color. Lieutenant Avery's voice became urgent. "Cadets, move away from the hallway, now." The new girl didn't move. She scanned the corridor in seconds, calculating, analyzing, predicting every possible threat. Her posture shifted subtly. Something in the air triggered a different mode. Calm became lethal focus. "Stay back," she ordered, voice now hard and authoritative. The command carried weight beyond her years. Cadets obeyed instinctively, stepping aside in awe and fear. Lieutenant Avery whispered, barely audible, "I didn't think I'd see you here for months. Now we might not survive the morning without you." Hardin, Burke, and Jensen exchanged looks that said everything without words: pride, humiliation, fear. And yet curiosity clawed at them. Who was this girl? How could someone their age radiate authority so terrifyingly effortlessly? The new girl took a few steps toward the armory corridor. Every movement was deliberate, precise, unyielding. A door at the far end of the hall rattled violently. Shadowy figures moved behind it, their intentions clear in their haste. The air seemed to thicken. Tension wrapped the hallway like barbed wire. She crouched slightly, assessing angles, timing, distance. Every motion a silent communication of lethal efficiency. Then she muttered under her breath, barely audible, "Amateurs, or very dangerous amateurs." The cadets craned their necks, straining to hear. The moment stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. A second alarm blared, louder this time, vibrating the metal lockers. Red lights bathed the walls. She straightened, lips pressed together, eyes narrowed, every instinct screaming, every muscle ready. Lieutenant Avery stepped closer, watching her. His voice trembled, controlled but strained. "They're armed. They're military grade. This isn't a drill." The new girl's gaze hardened. "Then it's time they learned why I'm not just another transfer cadet." Her duffel shifted on her shoulder as she moved. Hands went to weapons stored inside, hidden, secure, ready for deployment. But not a casual weapon. Tactical precision in every choice, every grip. Burke swallowed hard. Jensen whispered almost to himself, "Oh my God." Hardin's knees weakened slightly, though he stood tall, forcing composure. But his mind raced. Every story he'd heard, every rumor, every distant legend about this girl, collided into stark, horrifying clarity. This was no ordinary cadet. She had come here for evaluation, for observation, yes, but if she was forced to fight, she would dominate. And they, all of them, had just provoked the wrong person on the wrong morning in the wrong hallway. And worse, whatever was waiting in the armory corridor wasn't going to respect anyone's rank. The new girl exhaled, slowly measured. Every breath a ritual, a promise, a preparation. Then softly, almost to herself, "Let's see who's really prepared to die today." The hallway held its breath. Outside, the misted rain tapped against the windows, a soft drumbeat echoing the tension inside. Cadets shifted nervously, unsure whether to run, freeze, or pray. And somewhere deep inside her, the new girl smiled faintly. This was only the beginning. The hallway was a cage. The triad cadets stared at the new girl, frozen by the display of effortless dominance they hadn't expected from someone their age. Their bruised egos burned hotter than their confusion. The other cadets had scattered to the edges, leaning against lockers or peeking from around corners. Some whispered, others held their breath, unsure whether to watch or flee. Hardin's fists clenched, his knuckles white beneath the uniform gloves. He tried to muster authority, the fragile veneer of leadership, but the sight of Burke and Jensen sprawled on the floor, groaning and rubbing themselves, had shattered it. Pride alone wasn't enough to mask fear. "You think that?" Hardin began, voice shaky, trying to regain control. "Move," the new girl interrupted, her calm, measured tone freezing him mid-sentence. He stepped forward, ignoring her warning, trying to reclaim dominance. "You don't tell me." In an instant, the world around him seemed to slow. Every movement became precise, deliberate. The small, quiet transfer cadet shifted her weight, subtle, almost imperceptible, and in a blink she reached out, grabbed his wrist, and twisted it with surgical precision. Hardin's arm snapped behind him in a controlled, painful lock. His fingers scraped against his own uniform as he tried to pull free. Pain shot through him like electric fire, and his chest tightened with sudden panic. He stumbled forward, crashing into the lockers, the metal vibrating under his impact. The hallway fell silent. Cadets scattered along the walls, gawking. Lieutenant Avery's jaw tightened. The display wasn't violent, it was precise, efficient, terrifying in its economy of motion. The new girl didn't break a sweat. She didn't flinch. Her eyes scanned the rest of the hallway with the patience of a hunter assessing prey. Burke lunged next, perhaps seeking revenge, perhaps trying to redeem some shred of pride. She sidestepped effortlessly, guiding his forward momentum into a collision with the wall. Jensen tried to scramble up but hesitated, only to be nudged aside with minimal effort, sent sprawling onto the cold tile floor again. Every move she made was calculated, efficient, lethal without being unnecessarily brutal. Cadets whispered among themselves, awestruck. The ones brave enough to peek from corners saw someone entirely unlike any cadet they had ever known, someone trained, someone experienced, someone terrifyingly capable. Hardin struggled to his feet, his pride now completely eclipsed by fear and disbelief. Who are you?" he stammered. The new girl straightened, adjusting the strap of her duffel over her shoulder. "Someone you shouldn't have provoked," she said softly, almost disappointed, almost bored. Lieutenant Avery stepped closer, authoritative but tinged with urgency. "Cadets, step back. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with?" Hardin laughed nervously, though it sounded hollow. "Some transfer, that's all. She's just a Tier 1 Navy SEAL," the new girl said, cutting him off like a knife. The word hung in the air, echoing. Every cadet froze. Some staggered backward involuntarily. Hardin felt his stomach twist. Tier 1 operators were legends. Ghosts of warfare, mythologized stories passed down in whispers. He had read about them in manuals, seen videos of missions that seemed impossible, almost cinematic in their execution. And now one of them stood before him, calm and unimpressed by his authority or anyone else. "Did you hear that?" whispered one of the other cadets behind the line of lockers. "Yes," Burke muttered, voice trembling. "But she's just a kid, she can't." Her gaze swept the hallway, calculating, measuring distances, angles, potential threats, and escape routes. Every cadet watched, unable to look away. Then, almost casually, she turned her head toward the armory corridor. A low hum had begun, the sound of electronic locks failing under precise manipulation. Shadows shifted behind the reinforced door. Someone, or several someones, were trying to gain entry. The new girl's lips pressed into a thin line. She exhaled slowly, preparing herself. Every muscle in her body tensed with anticipation. Cadets could feel the shift in energy, like a storm gathering before a lightning strike. "Stay back," she commanded. Her voice had changed, sharp now, cutting through the tension. "All of you." The cadets obeyed instinctively, some trembling, some frozen by fear and awe. Lieutenant Avery remained beside her, watching the display with a mixture of relief and terror. The shadow behind the armory door moved again. A faint metallic click echoed through the corridor. Someone had triggered the door's lock mechanisms. She crouched slightly, barely perceptible, scanning angles and lines of approach, mapping every move in seconds. Her hands brushed over the strap of her duffel, not reaching for a weapon, not yet. But it was clear that if the situation escalated, she was ready to deploy deadly force with professional precision. Burke swallowed hard. What is she doing?" Lieutenant Avery's voice was barely audible. "Assessing the threat, preparing for engagement. This is what a Tier 1 operator does. She's trained for these situations since she was 14. Jensen groaned, trying to rise from the floor only to glance at her in terror. She's insane." "She's not insane," Avery said sharply. She's prepared, and you just got in her way. That's the mistake you made, one mistake." Hardin felt bile rise in his throat. Every ounce of his arrogance had been shredded. His pride wasn't the only thing injured. His sense of reality had been shattered. The sound of the lock picking stopped suddenly. A faint click echoed. The door began to swing. Two shadowy figures stepped into the corridor, partially obscured by the dim emergency lights. Their weapons were visible now, military-grade, black, sleek. The new girl straightened completely, her duffel shifting slightly as she moved her weight forward. She didn't speak. She didn't hesitate. One of the intruders spoke first. "Move aside, lady," he barked, confident, aggressive. She tilted her head slightly, like she was considering whether he was joking. "You don't know me," she said softly, a warning in the calm. He laughed, taking a step forward. "I think I do. You're just a transfer, that's all, just a—" Before he could finish, she moved. In a blur of controlled motion, she closed the distance between them in seconds. Her grip on the duffel shifted, revealing a tactical sidearm and a set of restraints. In one precise motion, she disarmed him, guided him backward, and pinned him against the wall. He struggled, but it was like wrestling with an immovable object. The second intruder froze, eyes widening, scanning for a way to intervene. The cadets behind the line could only watch in stunned silence. "Drop it," she said softly, the calmness in her tone contrasting with the violence of her movement. The intruder's eyes flicked to her face. There was something there they hadn't anticipated: recognition, fear, respect. He breathed, "You're not supposed to be here." "I'm exactly where I need to be," she replied. The cadets stared, hearts pounding. Pride, fear, awe, and disbelief battled within them. They had just learned the terrifying truth. This wasn't a student, a transfer, or even a cadet. This was a predator trained to perfection, and they had made the cardinal mistake, provoking her. Lieutenant Avery moved slightly, placing himself near the cadets as a buffer, but his eyes never left her. He understood. No one else could intervene. She was entirely in control of the situation. And when she finally allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smirk, every cadet understood. This was only the beginning. Because the next move could mean survival or disaster. The hallway felt smaller now, every tile, every locker, every shadow magnified by the tension in the air. The cadets, some still sprawled on the floor, others pressed against walls, watched as the new girl stood between the intruders and the rest of the academy. Her stance was calm, deliberate, every muscle ready, every movement economical. The first intruder, pinned against the wall, struggled feebly. He was strong, trained, confident, or he had been. Now his confidence faltered. He met her eyes, and in those seconds of eye contact, the truth struck. He was outmatched. Not just outmatched, but utterly, undeniably outclassed. "Do you even know who you're facing?" she asked quietly, almost conversationally, but her voice carried lethal authority. The intruder's jaw tightened. "You're just a kid." She tilted her head, a slight frown crossing her face. "Do I look like a kid to you?" He hesitated, fear creeping into his voice. "No, I mean, I've heard rumors." Burke and Jensen gawked. Hardin's knees felt weak. The whispers of a Tier 1 SEAL operator, something they had thought were legends, suddenly became terrifyingly real. Lieutenant Avery stepped forward, urgency lacing his tone. "Cadets, stay back. Do not interfere, not now." The new girl's eyes swept the hall, noting every exit, every potential advantage, every weakness in the intruder's formation. This wasn't just instinct. It was years of experience compressed into seconds. The second intruder lifted a device, a small tablet connected to an electronic interface. Red lights flickered as he tapped rapidly, trying to disable the security system or trigger a silent alert. She didn't flinch. Instead, she took a measured step forward, watching, calculating. "That's not a toy," she muttered under her breath. "Military grade," Avery whispered, his face pale. "Not even the academy has these." Her eyes narrowed. Then these aren't amateurs, they're professionals, and they know exactly what they're doing. The cadets behind her pressed against the walls, heartbeats hammering, unsure whether to look or look away. Every instinct screamed danger, but no one could pull their eyes from the new girl. She moved with authority that demanded attention, respect, and fear. Burke finally whispered, trembling, She's not human." Jensen shook his head, muttering under his breath, "There's no way someone this age." Hardin, still standing, clenched his fists, pride warred with fear. "This is ridiculous," he said through gritted teeth. "We can't let this happen, it's—" "You already let it happen," the new girl said softly, cutting him off. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, done too much, and carried a lifetime of experience in her gaze alone. Then the first intruder made a fatal mistake. He shifted his weight just slightly, trying to escape her grip. It was enough. She reacted in an instant. With a fluid motion that blurred to anyone watching, she spun, redirected his momentum, and sent him crashing into the lockers with a hollow clang. He groaned, trying to rise, but she pressed a knee to his back. Not harshly, not viciously, but enough to immobilize. The second intruder hesitated, watching in disbelief. He raised his device again. "Stop," she said, calm but commanding. "Drop it." The man's fingers hovered, indecision flickering in his eyes. Then, almost instinctively, he obeyed. The hallway was silent. Even the distant hum of alarms seemed to pause. Lieutenant Avery finally spoke. "Cadets, do you understand now?" Burke and Jensen shook their heads, mouths open. Hardin's jaw worked in silence, still trying to comprehend the impossible. "This isn't a transfer cadet," Avery continued. "She is the Navy's top operator in Tier 1 special missions. No one else here, no cadet, no officer, can match her skill. You just tested her patience and she was merciful." The new girl exhaled softly, stepping back slightly, allowing the intruders a moment to recover, but not too much. Every motion was precise. Every glance communicated authority. Hardin swallowed hard. You're a SEAL." She gave him a faint nod. "I'm a SEAL Tier 1 operator, and you made your first mistake today." Cadets gawked. The words hung in the air, heavy with revelation. Hardin's mind raced. He had mocked, pushed, and assumed superiority, and now every shred of that arrogance had been crushed. The intruders, regaining some composure, whispered to each other. Their expressions shifted from aggression to alarm, recognition flickering in their eyes. They had underestimated her. They had made a critical error, and now they were paying the price. Lieutenant Avery stepped closer, placing a protective hand subtly near the cadets. "She wasn't supposed to be here yet," he muttered, almost to himself. "We didn't expect contact, and now," he trailed off, voice heavy, "now we might not make it out of this morning without her." The new girl's eyes flicked to him, a slight acknowledgement, then returned to the intruders. "If you think you came for a simple theft or sabotage," she said softly, "you've underestimated this place and everyone in it." The cadets watched, riveted, as she moved again, circling the intruders, assessing. Every movement precise, every motion deliberate. She wasn't just reacting, she was predicting. Every second, every heartbeat, every twitch told her exactly what to do next. Burke whispered, almost in awe, She's incredible." Jensen nodded, too stunned to speak. Hardin clenched his fists, pride and fear warring inside him. He couldn't deny it. He had been wrong, horribly, catastrophically wrong. Then the sound came. The faint mechanical click of the second intruder's device, trying to override the system again. Her eyes narrowed. "You don't get second chances," she said, almost under her breath. In a split second, she lunged forward, grabbing the device and twisting the intruder's wrist. Sparks flew as the electronics shorted, and the man cursed under his breath. The cadets gasped. Lieutenant Avery exhaled slowly, relief mingled with awe. The first intruder tried again, but she anticipated him. spinning and redirecting his force with a practiced motion that sent him sprawling onto the hallway floor. The hallway had turned into a theater of skill, precision, and lethal authority. Cadets pressed against walls, frozen by the display, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. Then softly, almost to herself, the new girl muttered, "Amateurs." Lieutenant Avery's eyes widened. "No, they're not amateurs. These are trained professionals, and yet," his gaze met hers, "you've handled them perfectly, just as I hoped." The cadets' jaws hung open. They were witnessing history, a performance of lethal grace and unparalleled skill that no textbook, training manual, or rumor could prepare them for. And yet in the back of her mind, the new girl knew this was only the beginning. The intruders weren't the main threat, they were a test, a warning, a prelude to something much larger, much more dangerous. Her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes narrowing, posture taut. "This isn't over," she said softly, "not by a long shot." And for the first time, the cadets realized. The quiet, unassuming transfer they had mocked, cornered, and underestimated was a force of nature. A predator who had walked among them silently, and who now held the fate of the entire academy in her hands. The hallway hummed with the weight of the revelation. Pride had been shattered, fear had taken root, and suspense, thick and unyielding, hung in the air. The new girl's gaze swept the hallway one last time, ensuring every cadet understood the truth. She was not just a transfer. She was the Navy's top SEAL operator, and she was ready for whatever came next. The first mistake had been made, and now the game had truly begun. The hallways of the academy, moments ago buzzing with the minor chaos of cadet chatter, now felt like the calm before a storm. The new girl, still a quiet, lethal presence at the center, stood between the intruders and the rest of the cadets. Her gaze swept the hallway, assessing the threat, calculating the next move, and preparing for the inevitable escalation. Every second felt stretched, heavy with tension, as the faint hum of alarms echoed faintly in the distance. Cadets pressed themselves against walls, their hearts hammering in their chests. Every student who had doubted her earlier now felt a mix of awe and fear, unable to reconcile the quiet, small transfer they had cornered with the predator commanding the space before them. The intruders, shaking off the initial shock, paused for only a moment. The first one groaned, attempting to push himself off the floor. His eyes darted to the second intruder, silently communicating, "We underestimated her. We've made a grave mistake." Before either of them could regain composure, the heavy, measured sound of boots on tile echoed down the corridor. Cadets instinctively straightened, alert but unsure of what to expect. Lieutenant Avery stiffened, recognition and urgency sharpening his expression. The footsteps were deliberate, confident, and filled the hall with authority. Every cadet, including the triad, instinctively fell silent, watching as a figure emerged from the shadows. Commander Holt. He was a man whose presence alone commanded respect. Usually confined to offices, strategic meetings, and distant oversight, he rarely appeared in the hallways during routine operations. Now, with his jacket crisp, medals glinting, and an aura of unwavering authority, he stopped only a few feet from the new girl. The commander's eyes widened, flicking between the intruders and the young woman. A subtle pallor crossed his normally stern face. Recognition, awe, and something darker, respect bordering on fear, played across his features. "Ma'am," Holt said, his voice steady but laced with urgency, "we weren't expecting you this early." The new girl gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. "I requested anonymity," she replied, her voice calm, unwavering, carrying the weight of experience beyond her apparent age. Holt's gaze swept the hallway, landing briefly on the three fallen cadets, Hardin, Burke, and Jensen, before returning to her. His jaw tightened. "They didn't know," he said simply. Burke, trembling, whispered to Jensen, "Commander Holt here," and he looked scared. Jensen's eyes were wide. "Scared? That's impossible. He's Commander Holt. Nobody scares him." Holt didn't speak again immediately. Instead, he assessed the situation, moving with deliberate caution. Every step was measured, calculated. Then, his gaze fixed on the new girl once more. "Cadets," he said, voice booming through the hall now, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Step back, all of you, immediately." The cadets obeyed without hesitation, instinctively respecting the presence of the commander and the lethal young operator. Hardin's jaw clenched, struggling with the mixture of fear, pride, and humiliation. He had always thought authority and strength were measured by intimidation. Now he realized just how naive that belief had been. The new girl's eyes flicked briefly toward the intruders, then back at Holt. "This was supposed to be a quiet evaluation tour," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Not this." Holt nodded, his expression grave. "Not anymore." The intruders froze. Recognition dawned in their eyes. Their plan, whatever it had been, had hit an unexpected obstacle. The top operator in the academy, someone who had not only defeated them but anticipated every misstep with terrifying precision, was not alone. One of the intruders finally spoke, voice rough with suppressed panic. "You're Commander Holt." Holt's eyes narrowed, assessing them like a predator analyzing prey. "I am," he replied, "and you gentlemen have made a serious error." The new girl didn't speak. She simply shifted her weight, subtly, a silent indication that the next phase had begun. Every movement she made conveyed lethal potential. The cadets pressed back further, understanding instinctively that the hallway was no longer theirs. The air was thick with anticipation. Something larger, more dangerous than they could imagine, was about to unfold. Holt turned toward the new girl, voice softer but carrying immense weight. "You handled the first encounter perfectly," he said, "but it's going to escalate. They're professionals, trained and dangerous. You need to be ready." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I'm ready," she replied, eyes scanning the intruders. "But they're not amateurs. These aren't random thieves. They know exactly what they're doing." Holt's jaw tightened. "Then we move fast, no hesitation. I trust you completely." The intruders exchanged glances, their confidence waning. Recognition dawned across their faces. Whoever they thought they were dealing with had been underestimated catastrophically. The hallway shifted from a place of intimidation and casual arrogance to a theater of controlled danger. Every cadet behind them sensed it, hearts pounding, breaths caught in their throats. Even the most confident among them realized that they were mere spectators now, watching someone far beyond their understanding in action. The new girl took a step forward. Every motion was smooth, controlled, efficient. The cadets noticed it immediately. She was no longer merely defending. She was preparing for precise, calculated engagement. The intruders stiffened, sensing the inevitable confrontation. One of them raised a hand to signal a move, but she anticipated it instantly. In one subtle shift, she moved closer, closing the distance, her gaze locking onto the aggressor. "Do not underestimate me," she said softly. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of decades of experience in its measured tone. Holt's eyes widened slightly. Even he, the seasoned commander, recognized the aura she projected, a deadly precision that could unseat even the most confident professional. One intruder made the mistake of lunging. In an instant, the new girl's reflexes kicked in. A swift movement, a controlled redirection of force, and he was pinned against the wall, immobilized in a manner so efficient it was almost invisible to the untrained eye. The cadets gasped. Even Holt exhaled sharply, recognizing the perfection of her technique. The second intruder hesitated, then slowly dropped the device he had been manipulating, realizing the futility of his actions. His eyes widened, reflecting the dawning terror that they had miscalculated. The new girl's expression remained calm, almost detached, but her stance projected authority, readiness, and lethal potential. "I warned you," she said quietly, a statement and a promise in the same breath. Holt stepped slightly closer, placing himself between the cadets and any potential threat. His eyes met hers. "They're not done," he murmured. "Prepare yourself." The new girl's lips pressed together. "I'm ready," she repeated, almost under her breath, as if reminding herself. A tense silence settled over the hallway. The cadets, still pressed against the walls, were witnesses to a revelation. The quiet, unassuming transfer they had mocked, cornered, and underestimated was not only a Tier 1 SEAL but a predator in control of the situation. And now, with Commander Holt fully present, the stakes had just escalated. The first mistake had been made, the second threat had arrived, and the hallway, once a familiar path in a routine academy day, was now a stage for lethal precision, professional skill, and deadly anticipation. And the cadets understood, finally, that the new girl was no longer just a transfer. She was the centerpiece of a living, breathing force they had never encountered before. The next move by her, the intruders, or anyone else in the hallway would decide who survived, who faltered, and who would remember this day for the rest of their lives. The hallway, now a pressure cooker of tension, held its collective breath. Cadets pressed against the walls, frozen in awe and fear, while the intruders assessed the new girl with growing alarm. They had expected a simple target, maybe a transfer to intimidate, maybe an easy diversion. Instead, they were staring down a predator, poised with lethal precision. The new girl's eyes flicked to the intruders. Calm, measured, unflinching. Every breath she took was deliberate, every muscle coiled for action. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone conveyed authority, mastery, and deadly skill. Lieutenant Avery stepped slightly closer to the cadets, a subtle shield between the spectators and the action. "They've trained for months to bypass our security," he whispered, urgency threading his voice. "Do not interfere. She's the only one who can handle this." The first intruder, recovering slightly from the earlier encounter, lunged toward a reinforced door, likely attempting to access the armory or bypass the alarms. His movement was fast, practiced, but predictable, too predictable. The new girl reacted before he even realized she had moved. In a single, fluid motion, she closed the distance, using his own momentum to redirect him into a wall. The impact echoed down the hallway, a metallic clang that made the cadets flinch. The intruder grunted, barely able to rise as she pressed a knee to his back. Not cruelly, not viciously, but efficiently, immobilizing him in seconds. Cadets gasped. Burke whispered, trembling, How is she?" Jensen muttered, barely audible, "There's no way, she's a kid." Hardin could only stare, chest tight, mind reeling. He had spent his life believing in his own dominance, his own strength, only to be shattered in the span of minutes. The second intruder, realizing his partner's failure, aimed a compact submachine gun at her. His eyes flicked toward the cadets and Holt, calculating leverage, angles, escape routes. He was trained, professional, but he had misjudged the new girl. She didn't flinch. Her eyes narrowed. Every detail was absorbed. The angle of his stance, the tension in his grip, the position of his feet. In that heartbeat, she assessed every potential outcome, every move he could make, and the lethal response she would need. A subtle shift, almost imperceptible, and she closed the distance, her body moving like liquid steel. Before he could fire, she executed a disarm maneuver that seemed impossibly fast. The weapon clattered to the ground, skidding across the tiles. Cadets gasped again, watching the impossible unfold before them. Burke whispered, "She's untouchable." The intruder lunged, panicked now. She met him with the precision of someone who had trained for decades, though she was barely out of her teens. His strikes were redirected effortlessly, his momentum controlled, contained, and neutralized. One by one, his attacks were anticipated, countered, and nullified. She didn't need brute strength, just precision, timing, and the kind of instinct honed in real combat, under real pressure. Lieutenant Avery exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly. Even he, who had overseen countless operations, recognized the extraordinary skill on display. "She's doing exactly what she was trained to do," he muttered under his breath. Outside, rain pelted against the windows. The hallway seemed distant now, a stage for the clash between experience and aggression. Cadets, though terrified, could not look away. They were witnessing a living legend in action, a young woman whose training, skill, and discipline eclipsed everything they had ever imagined. The intruders, panicked and desperate, regrouped. One attempted to signal for reinforcements, pressing a small device against his ear. She noticed instantly, pivoting with lethal grace to block the signal, slamming the device from his hand. Sparks flew. His frustrated curses echoed, but she remained unflinching, unhurried, entirely in control. Commander Holt stepped forward slightly, voice low but firm. "They didn't account for her skill. You've been warned. This could escalate beyond this hallway." She glanced at him, a faint nod acknowledging his presence and authority, then turned her focus back to the intruders. She was the eye of the storm, calm, centered, lethal. The first intruder tried one last desperate maneuver, swinging a metallic tool at her. In a single motion, she caught it, twisted his wrist, and guided his momentum into a nearby locker. He crashed with a loud thud, unable to rise. The cadets flinched collectively. Burke's hands shook. Jensen's jaw was slack. Hardin's pride had been shattered completely. The second intruder made a fateful mistake. He attempted to retreat, hopping to escape the hallway and regroup. She anticipated it immediately. With a fluid motion, she closed the gap, her hands expertly controlling his arms, guiding him to the floor in a controlled takedown. The hallway fell silent again. The only sound was the distant hum of alarms and the faint drip of rain from the windows. Holt's voice broke the tension, firm and controlled. "She's contained them, but this isn't over. Reinforcements could arrive any minute." The new girl exhaled softly, crouched slightly, scanning the hallway and every cadet, ensuring no one was in danger. She had neutralized the immediate threat, but the real test, what lay ahead, was only beginning. Cadets pressed back against walls, their eyes wide, realizing the full extent of her skill. They had assumed they understood strength, authority, and control, but everything they had believed crumbled in the span of minutes. Burke whispered, voice trembling, She's the best, the absolute best." Jensen nodded mutely, unable to articulate the mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief he felt. Hardin clenched his fists, chest tight. Pride, embarrassment, and terror warred within him. He had underestimated her. He had mocked her. And now he had no choice but to acknowledge the truth. The new girl shifted her weight, eyes sweeping the corridor one last time. Every motion was calm, deliberate, and commanding. She wasn't just defending. She was asserting control over the situation, ensuring that any further escalation would be met with precision and lethal efficiency. Lieutenant Avery exhaled slowly, relief mingled with tension. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "They'll regroup, they'll try again, and next time," his voice trailed off, heavy with implication. The new girl's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we'll be ready," she said softly, almost to herself. The cadets realized in that moment that they were witnessing not just skill, but mastery. A predator who moved among them silently, efficiently, and deadly. And the storm, whatever lay ahead, was coming. The first strike had been made. The intruders had been neutralized. But the real danger, the true test of her skill and courage, was yet to come. And for the first time, the cadets understood. The quiet transfer they had mocked was no longer just a newcomer. She was the Navy's top SEAL, a living legend, and the only thing standing between the academy and disaster. The hallway remained silent, heavy with suspense, every cadet holding their breath, knowing that what came next would decide everything. The hallway was silent, the only sound the faint hum of alarms and the distant patter of rain against the windows. Cadets pressed against the walls, eyes wide, hearts hammering in their chests. Even Hardin, whose arrogance had driven him to provoke her, stood frozen, jaw tight, fists clenched. The new girl crouched slightly, eyes scanning every angle, every potential threat, every shadow. The intruders she had neutralized moments before were now sprawled across the floor, groaning, scrambling weakly to regain composure. They were professionals, trained, dangerous, but utterly outclassed. Lieutenant Avery's voice cut through the tension, low but commanding. "This isn't over. They have backup. We need to contain the situation and prepare for the final strike." The new girl's lips pressed into a thin line. She had anticipated this moment, the calm before the storm, the seconds when everyone assumed victory could be claimed. But she had trained for situations like this. Years of experience, operations no cadet could imagine, had prepared her for the exact scenario unfolding now. Her duffel shifted slightly over her shoulder, and she drew a tactical sidearm with the precision of a surgeon. Every movement was deliberate, silent, and efficient. Cadets instinctively took a step back, understanding instinctively that this was no display of bravado, it was professional lethal readiness. Commander Holt appeared at the far end of the hallway, his expression grave. "Ma'am," he said, voice tight, "we have reports of multiple intruders heading toward this corridor. We need to hold them off until security can contain the rest." The new girl nodded subtly. "Understood," she replied, her voice calm but filled with authority. Her eyes swept the hallway once more, and she noticed the faintest movement at the far end, shadows shifting, silhouettes approaching. Hardin's stomach turned. The rumors, the whispers, the stories about Tier 1 operators had become real in the span of a morning. And now, he realized, they had been a warning, not a fantasy. The first reinforcements of intruders appeared, 2 more figures moving swiftly, coordinated, professional. They didn't shout. They didn't hesitate. They assumed dominance, but they had made a grave error, underestimating the new girl. She moved first. Every motion was precise, anticipatory. A slight step, a subtle twist, and she intercepted the first intruder's strike. The clash was silent but brutal. She redirected his momentum into a wall, neutralizing him with minimal effort. The second intruder aimed a weapon at her. She pivoted, fluid, almost imperceptible, closing the gap in a heartbeat and disarming him with a controlled twist of his wrist. Cadets gasped, hearts racing. Burke muttered under his breath, "She's unreal." Jensen's eyes widened. How is this possible?" Holt exhaled sharply. "Precision, training, anticipation, that's how." The new girl didn't stop. Every intruder's move was countered with lethal efficiency. She wasn't just reacting. She was predicting, controlling, orchestrating the outcome of each encounter before it even began. The cadets watched, frozen in awe and terror, as she neutralized each threat with surgical precision. Every punch, every redirection, every takedown was measured, calculated, and flawless. Hardin's chest tightened. He had mocked her. He had cornered her. And now he realized he was witnessing something beyond comprehension, a force of nature, a predator who had walked silently among them and now dominated the situation completely. The final intruder, recognizing the futility of frontal attacks, attempted a tactical maneuver trying to flank her. But she anticipated it instantly. Her eyes flicked to his approach, and with a single motion she shifted her weight, intercepted him mid-step, and neutralized his advance with a precise, controlled takedown. Lieutenant Avery exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and awe. "She's contained them all," he said quietly. "Every single one." The cadets pressed against the walls, their eyes wide, unable to look away. Burke whispered, voice trembling, I can't believe it." Jensen nodded mutely, still in shock. Hardin's fists dropped, pride shattered completely. He had assumed strength was intimidation. Now he knew true power, and it was quiet, calculated, and absolute. The hallway fell silent. Even the hum of alarms seemed distant, muffled by the weight of the display they had witnessed. Every cadet understood the truth. The quiet, unassuming transfer they had mocked was no ordinary student. She was the Navy's top SEAL operator, a predator in human form, and the only thing standing between them and disaster. Commander Holt stepped closer to the new girl, his expression grave but relieved. "You handled it perfectly," he said. "I knew you would, but this was only a test. Something larger is coming. Are you ready?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Always," she replied, voice calm, unwavering. Her gaze swept the hallway, taking in every cadet, every neutralized intruder, every shadow. "But we need to secure the perimeter and ensure no further breaches." Cadets pressed themselves against the walls, realizing they were witnesses to history. Burke whispered, still shaking, "She's the best, the absolute best." Jensen nodded mutely, unable to articulate the mixture of awe, fear, and disbelief. Hardin clenched his fists, chest tight, knowing he had been utterly wrong. The new girl shifted slightly, eyes scanning the hallway one last time. Every motion was calm, deliberate, commanding. She wasn't just defending, she was asserting control, ensuring that any further escalation would be met with lethal efficiency. Lieutenant Avery exhaled slowly, tension still lingering. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "They'll regroup, they'll try again, and next time," his voice trailed off, heavy with implication. The new girl's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we'll be ready," she said softly, almost to herself. The hallway remained silent, heavy with suspense, every cadet holding their breath, knowing that what came next would decide everything. And for the first time, the cadets understood. The quiet transfer they had mocked, cornered, and underestimated was no longer just a newcomer. She was the Navy's top SEAL, a living legend, and the only thing standing between the academy and disaster. First Strike had been neutralized, the intruders defeated, but the true challenge, the final test of skill, strategy, and leadership was yet to come. The hallway was silent. The echoes of footsteps, shouts, and the clang of lockers had faded into memory, leaving a heavy, almost sacred quiet. Cadets pressed against the walls, still trembling from what they had witnessed. Some couldn't believe it. Some couldn't stop staring. And Hardin, pride shattered and ego in ruins, could only watch in stunned silence. The new girl, the Tier 1 Navy SEAL, stood at the center of the hallway. Her duffel strap rested over her shoulder, the tactical sidearm holstered, movements calm and deliberate. She didn't boast. She didn't smile. She simply exuded the quiet confidence of someone who had faced impossible odds, survived, and controlled every outcome. Commander Holt approached slowly, every step deliberate, his medals glinting faintly in the dim emergency lights. He stopped beside her, eyes scanning the hallway, then fixed on the cadets. "Cadets," Holt said, voice firm and commanding. "You have just witnessed a level of skill, discipline, and professionalism that most officers never see in their careers. You have also learned an invaluable lesson: never underestimate anyone. And especially never underestimate the quiet, the unassuming, the ones you think you know." Burke, still pressed against the wall, whispered, She's incredible." Jensen nodded mutely, eyes wide, still in shock. Hardin's jaw worked, but no words came. Holt's gaze returned to the new girl. "Ma'am, it's time." The new girl exhaled softly, straightening, shoulders squared, eyes calm but alert. She removed the hood from her head, letting her hair fall free, revealing her face fully for the first time to most of the cadets. Then she addressed the room, not with arrogance, not with pride, but with authority that could not be questioned. "I am Lieutenant Commander Riley Hart," she said, voice calm and commanding. "Tier 1 Navy SEAL, operator. And today you learned the consequences of underestimating someone's experience, training, and resolve." The hallway went silent. Every cadet froze, some swallowing hard, some blinking rapidly as the truth sank in. Riley Hart, the quiet transfer, the unassuming cadet they had mocked, cornered, and doubted, was not only a SEAL but one of the Navy's most elite Tier 1 operators. A low murmur ran through the cadets. Whispers of disbelief, awe, and fear spread like wildfire. Burke's hands shook as he muttered, "Lieutenant Commander, she's real." Hardin's chest tightened. Pride, shame, fear, emotions tangled and raw flooded through him. He had judged, mocked, and cornered her. Now he realized just how small his arrogance had been. Holt stepped forward, his expression grave but filled with respect. "Cadets, you will address her properly with rank and protocol, not because of fear but because of merit. Lieutenant Commander Hart has earned it through skill, through leadership, and through every mission she has undertaken." Riley Hart scanned the cadets, her gaze firm but not unkind. "I do not seek recognition for what I do. I do what must be done to protect those who cannot protect themselves and to ensure that missions are completed with precision. Today, you all witnessed one small part of that." Cadets exchanged glances, still processing. Some had tears in their eyes, fear, awe, and respect mingling into a powerful mixture. Burke whispered almost reverently, She's a legend." Jensen nodded, finally finding words. We underestimated her, completely." Hardin's voice was quieter, almost broken. "Lieutenant Commander, I'm sorry. We shouldn't have." Riley's eyes softened slightly, just enough for him to see that she acknowledged the apology without needing to dwell on it. "Mistakes are part of learning," she said. "Remember today, respect skill, knowledge, and experience, even if it doesn't fit your expectations. That lesson alone can save lives." Lieutenant Avery stepped forward, his voice measured but filled with pride. "Riley has not only neutralized threats that could have endangered this academy, but she has also demonstrated leadership, precision, and control. She has shown you all what it truly means to serve." The cadets, still pressed against the walls, finally began to relax, though awe remained heavy in the air. The hallway, once a place of intimidation and petty disputes, now felt sacred. They had witnessed history. They had witnessed a living legend. Hardin swallowed hard, jaw tight, finally understanding the enormity of what he had witnessed. I understand," he murmured. Pride had been replaced with humility, arrogance with respect. Riley Hart exhaled slowly, surveying the room one last time. "Today was a test. Not for me, for all of you. Never forget that discipline, preparation, and respect for skill are what make a team stronger, a mission possible, and a life worth protecting." Cadets nodded, some wiping tears, some still trembling, all transformed in ways they could not articulate. The stories they had heard about SEALs, about Tier 1 operators, about elite forces, now they knew the truth. It was not myth. It was living, breathing, and standing before them. Commander Holt's voice cut softly but firmly through the quiet. "Lieutenant Commander Hart, on behalf of the Academy and the cadets, we are honored to have you here. And on behalf of every student who doubted, mocked, or underestimated you, we apologize. We now understand." Riley nodded once, accepting the respect without arrogance. "Carry the lesson forward," she said softly. "Honor skill, honor knowledge, honor those who serve, and above all, never underestimate anyone, not even those who seem quiet, small, or unassuming. Strength is not always obvious." The cadets exchanged glances again. Burke whispered to Jensen, I'll never doubt anyone again." Jensen nodded, voice trembling. "Ever, not after today." Hardin exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief, understanding, and humility. I get it now," he said, "completely." The hallway, once a stage for intimidation and conflict, had been transformed. Riley Hart's presence had left a mark that would never fade. She had neutralized threats with precision, demonstrated leadership beyond her years, and commanded respect not through words, but through action. Lieutenant Avery smiled faintly, eyes glistening with pride. "They'll remember this day," he said softly, "long after you leave." Riley Hart's gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, as she glanced at the cadets. "Let them remember," she said. "But let them also remember this. Skill, preparation, and respect save lives. That's what matters most." The rain outside had slowed to a drizzle, tapping lightly against the windows. Light filtered into the hallway, illuminating the faces of cadets transformed by awe, fear, and respect. The intruders had been neutralized, the immediate threat ended, but the lesson, the legend, and the memory of what they had witnessed would endure far longer than any alarm or clash could. For the cadets, it was more than a demonstration of skill. It was a revelation, a living lesson in courage, discipline, and the consequences of underestimation. They had seen the quietest, smallest transfer rise into a force of nature, commanding a room with precision, control, and the aura of legend. Riley Hart turned toward Commander Holt, saluting sharply. "Mission accomplished," she said simply. Holt returned the salute, voice steady and full of respect. "Yes, Lieutenant Commander, you've set the standard for every cadet here. Today, they learned the meaning of true skill." As Riley Hart stepped forward, leaving the hallway behind her, the cadets understood. Nothing would ever be the same. They had witnessed a Tier 1 Navy SEAL, a predator of legend, and a teacher of unparalleled skill. And they would carry the memory, the awe, and the lesson for the rest of their lives. The quiet transfer was no longer quiet. The unassuming cadet had become a living legend, and the Academy would never forget the day Lieutenant Commander Riley Hart walked its halls and left a mark that time, fear, and awe could never erase.